John Laurens and Fighting for Equality by Lindsay Kroll. So, first of all, you've most likely never heard of John Laurens. Well, this is John Laurens. I first heard about this man while listening to Hamilton, the musical soundtrack. I just thought, wow, this guy sounds stupid. I've never even heard of him before. But then I did some research, and he's actually really cool. I'm also doing this project because not many people know John Laurens. He was a pretty amazing man. Mr. Visser may mention him once or twice, but we're definitely not going into the detail I am in this presentation. John Laurens was born in 1754. His parents were Eleanor Laurens and Henry Laurens. Eleanor unfortunately died when John was a child. Now, you're probably thinking, why match this random dead guy up with equality? Well, it started when John Laurens was a child. He really disliked his father's slave trade business. After Eleanor's death, Henry sent John and his brothers to Switzerland for schooling. There in Switzerland, John adopted some of their beliefs, including his teacher's disapproval toward slavery. Then the Laurens boys traveled to England to study law by their father's demand. John, while still in England, then discovered Thomas Paine's Common Sense pamphlet. This sparked quite an interest for the war in John, so he sailed back to his home, South Carolina, even though his father wanted him to stay in England to study. John then convinced his father to get him a volunteer position on George Washington's staff in August 1777. He then took part in the Battle of Germantown and earned a musket ball to the shoulder, as well as a reputation of a brave and reckless soldier. Though his reckless quality drew concern from John's close friends, Alexander Hamilton and Marquis de Lafayette. After John's act of bravery at Germantown, George Washington gave John the position of an official aide-de-camp. Later, John dueled General Charles Lee for being disrespectful towards George Washington. John shot Lee in the side and won the duel. Now here's the stuff you want to know. John Laurens and his battle against slavery. John's view on slavery was very unique. He wrote, "We have sunk the Africans and their descendants below the standard of humanity, and almost rendered them incapable of that blessing which equal heaven bestowed upon us all." John encouraged everyone around him to free their slaves, but John was very unsuccessful. John was not about to give up, though. He made a plan. John wanted to create a new military regiment, made up entirely of black soldiers from the South. The men would be granted their freedom in turn for their service. John wrote to the Continental Congress, which his father was the president of, but got denied his plan. Henry told John that if he wanted to command a regiment so badly, just raise a white regiment. John was very hurt that Henry thought that his plan was based only on his own ambition. Eventually, Henry convinced John to just give up the matter. John and his aide buddies stayed at Valley Forge for the winter. Then John took part in the Battle of Monmouth. Shortly after, John was sent to France to receive reinforcements. After spending about a year in France, John heard the British were starting to attack the South, so he got permission to come back home and defend his home state. On his way back, John petitioned again for his black regiment. John was overjoyed when Congress approved him 3,000 black men, but only if John could get permission from South Carolina and Georgia. The men would be given their freedom and $50 for their service. Congress also promoted John to lieutenant colonel. But unfortunately, both Georgia and South Carolina legislators strongly disapproved of John's plan, so his dream was denied once again. John fought in Charleston, South Carolina, but was taken prisoner by the British. But don't worry, a few months later he was exchanged and taken back. Then John was sent to France along with Thomas Paine to help Ben Franklin get loans for America. John went straight to the King of France and by August 1781, John arrived back home with 2 full ships of supplies, just in time for the Battle of Yorktown. But the war was far from over for John. He returned to South Carolina and helped General Nathanael Greene drive out remaining British forces and get information through a spy network. John pushed for his Black Regiment one more time, but failed again. On August 27th, 1782, John was atop his horse, leading his men to keep the British from crossing the Combahee River. But John was ambushed and chose to attack rather than retreat. With much courage and recklessness, John fought with all his might, but was struck and fell from his horse, dying on the field. Nathanael Greene, learning of John's death, said, "The army has lost a brave officer, and the public a worthy citizen." George Washington wrote, "In a word, he had not a fault I could ever discover, unless intrepidity bordering upon rashness could come under that denomination, and to this he was excited by the purest motives." Alexander Hamilton said, "His career of virtue is at an end. How strangely are human affairs conducted that so many excellent qualities could not ensure a more happy fate. I feel the loss of a friend I truly and most tenderly loved." And fitting, the words engraved on John's tombstone,